We do not look for justification neither in the past nor in the future. Nobody can tell us what the future is and with what utensils does one eat it. Not to lie about the future is impossible, and one can lie about it at will. We assert that the shouts about the future are for us the same as the tears about the past.
This work actually starts in Chile, and it starts in Chile in a project which is a residency in Punta Arenas, where I'm invited to take part with a group of artists, other artists, in research around the 500 years of the passing of Fernando Magalhães in the Straits of Magellan. And as we all know, this is the voyage that, even though Magellan didn't actually complete the voyage, he is still today credited with having sort of confirmed that the earth was round. But Magellan's sort of crossing that strait also symbolizes the beginning of the expansion into colonization. So the intention of the residency was really about challenging artists to look at the historical events of the circumnavigation as a decolonial project. The actual source of the residency, which was to be critical in a decolonial way about the circumnavigation, actually proved to me to be a fairly uninteresting project. But the Chilean trip actually became very interesting because as we were leaving Santiago, the present, more recent rebellion and revolution came about, and so literally as we were leaving, we got whiff of the unrest in the cities and people's staying away from work and the demonstrations everywhere. And that, of course, as we know, led to a new constitution in Chile and a whole political story. So I made a film, which is in this exhibition, called Más pesado que el cielo, which brings together the heaviness of what I felt in Punta Arenas and the frustration of what I felt about not wanting to deal with a decolonial project that I was asked to deal with, and the simultaneous excitement of watching people in the streets politically and really complaining about something that was important to them. When I had finished the film, I felt like making a series of drawings, and the drawings that I started making were a lot about lines and a lot about geographic lines, looking at maps, and our maps are drawn with lines and grids. And as you would be able to see in the exhibition, I became very obsessed with the ideas of lines and how lines cause form and waves and currents. And as I was drawing that series of drawings and the lines were appearing, I realized that I was looking in my brain, I was looking at Naum Gabo. And I realized that this was also time to go back to Naum Gabo in a more serious way, to reference his work and to create a series of works around Gabo's oeuvre. Naum Gabo was very much part of those 7 years or 6 or 7 years of state of grace that we call the constructivists. We're talking somewhere between 1917 and 1922, so 100 years ago. And he worked hand in hand with all the names that we know from that movement. Except his life panned out in a very different way, because most of the constructivists either died in prison or in gulags and didn't exactly have the opportunity to continue their artistic project.
Today, we proclaim our word to you people in the squares and on the streets.
So in many ways, he's the one who does indeed manage to take his ideas that started in constructivism and pursue them. And the unique thing about Gabo is also the fact that even from the very beginning, he wasn't so interested in producing agitprop structures, for example, like Klutzis did. He was right from the beginning interested in a more pure and abstract sculptural problem. He was looking into what line did, what space did, what the spaces in between and inside sculptures meant. So his project, like Rodchenko's project, for example, was very much positioned right from the beginning in the realm of abstraction. He was looking into abstraction as part of his political way of life. The works you see over here are all, in one way or another, references to one of the sculptures that Naum Gabo made, and they're all about line and space and openness and interior spaces and interior spaces. In my own everyday practice, the idea of designing something from the beginning, from scratch, from nothing, all of a sudden was superseded by a just intuitive feel to reuse objects that I had around me. So I am obviously familiar with assemblage practices from the late 20th century, but I'm also very familiar with the present day's discoursing of what's happened to our planet and the need we have to recycle, to reuse objects, to fix objects that are no longer mechanically working, and to make good of these objects. So inside this curiosity to reuse Naum Gabo as a kind of starting point for thinking politics and abstraction, there's also a very real and concrete need to reuse mechanical objects that surround me and are part of my life and need to be reinvented in another way. So every single one of these objects has a meaning. The lathe comes from the workshop at the art school where I work, and it was about to be thrown out because it no longer worked, and it provided a beautiful metaphor for their idea of spinning and putting this famous vertical Naum Gabo in a spinning position. The window burglar bar comes from my studio. The dentist's support table comes from the dentist shop just up the road from my home where I walk my dog every day. And the gas heater comes from my home.
We proclaim our word to you people in the squares and on the streets. We are placing our work, convinced that art must not remain a sanctuary for the idle.
In the gas sculpture, you never see a sculpture by Naum Gabo, you just hear his voice of the old recording of him reading out his manifesto to the public. I should also just say that they also printed it out in pamphlet form and that they distributed in Russia, in Moscow at the time. And the other thing that's very important about the gas heater sculpture is that this whole work, this whole project came obviously to its final conclusion in the last 2 months, as it should do. And these last 2 months have been the months of the war, the invasion of the Ukraine and the aggression of one country over another. And in the discussions and in the information that has been revealed to us, general public, about this war, a lot has been revealed about the intricate and complex economic relations and dependencies between Europe and Russia. And one of the most controversial dependencies is precisely the dependence that Europe has on Russian gas. So it was for me a doubly political sort of innuendo. It's never clearly stated in the work, but the work is like about a closed circuit of gas movements that go from one object to another object. But of course, they are both the same object, because the one is the insides of the gas heater and the other one is the outside of the gas heater. And then in the real world, the two actually make one gas object. So it's some kind of metaphor for a very disturbing political moment that we are living in. But just to go back to the manifesto, in the manifesto, Naum Gabo himself speaks about line and form and void, how he's looking into void. And he makes clear, to me at least, that this is an artist who was looking at the idea of void in sculpture, at the absence of form, long before the more conventional artists that we know have done that, like Barbara Hepworth or Henry Moore. And when I was working on works like The Burglar Bar, which comes from my studio, by the way, it became very evident that I was using an object that was supposed to block the entrance of people into a space, but then I was tying around it reference to a sculpture which wanted to talk about how void and emptiness and being able to see through and walk through was valuable space. So the tensions in this very subtle and almost invisible sculpture is indicated by Gabo himself in his manifesto when he talks about space and time and void, and how he talks often about political systems come and go, but these issues that he's looking at are present forever. And I guess my question here always would be, to what extent are these issues the real political issues? So I guess as a final thing, I should just also say that as I was developing the last stages of the lathe project, I found myself covering a detail with a red circle, plexiglass circle, as I, in a very conventional sculptural way, tried to integrate the machine into becoming a sculpture. And as I'm negotiating the machine and the sculpture, you know, the sculptural element, the abstract red circle, and the very practical, functional forms of the machines, I was taken back to 40 years ago, images of myself playing with very similar looking circles and enacting a performance in my art school in Cape Town. And I was able to find those images, and those are the images you see on the wall here. So that's me in third year at art school at university at Michaelis School of Fine Art in Cape Town. And in a way, the bringing of these images to the project serves for me as a kind of tying up, as a lifetime sort of approach to research, which is something I sometimes, when you do a lot of research and when you do a lot of projects, you often think, well, is this all coherent and does it all make sense and how does it make sense? And there are always like logical things that make sense. Oh, you know, you're an African, so you're always dealing with Africa, but you're also a European, so you're always dealing with the relationship between Africa and Europe, and you're a sculptor, so you always make very rarefied sculptural forms. So those things are easy to be consistent about. For me, what's not easy to be consistent about is this kind of imagery where I kind of feel the consistency is almost subliminal. I was 21 and I was playing with those objects at the time. I didn't know what I meant. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew that they were in some way significant to me, and by articulating them physically as a performance, I was looking for meaning, I guess, in those in those forms and my body and what I could do with it. And I find it incredible that 40 years later, I'm still doing the same thing with exactly the same form. And I don't feel that I'm repeating myself. I think it's been a lot of thinking that's gone on over the years, and that's why I accepted for myself the idea of bringing the images to this exhibition.
And he who tomorrow will bring us nothing of what he has done today is of no use for the future. Today is the deed. We will account for it tomorrow. The past we are leaving behind as a carrion. The future we leave to the fortune teller. We take the present day.